Welcome everyone to a series of webinars on our analysis enhancements for sheep genetics for 2022. This year is a really exciting year for us with a number of enhancements being implemented for the 1st of May run. So breeders can expect to see results from our new enhancements in early to mid-May. This year's enhancements fall into two key themes. The first one is the enhancement that allow us to produce better breeding values through improved analysis, as well as the enhancements that allow us to maintain the long-term efficiencies of our genetic evaluations, and in particular allow us to continue to run our evaluations for Merino Select and Lamb Plan with growing numbers of genotypes. So as I mentioned, this year's enhancements will be implemented from the 1st of May. Please see this series of webinars on detail on each of the individual enhancements, as well as written communication that can be found on our Sheep Genetics website. Sheep Genetics will also be running a series of forums once the enhancements have been implemented for more detail, as well as our regular regional forums. Details on the date and location of these forums, again, can be found on our website. So on this slide, we'll see the enhancements for this year. There's quite a number, and it is exciting that some of these have been in the pipeline for a number of years, and it's exciting that they're finally being brought to fruition. We'll go through each of these enhancements in detail, bar a couple, and I just wanted to touch on those now. The first one is around the Corriedale analysis being solely reported from the maternal analysis. So at the prior to this year's enhancements, Corriedales actually received a set of breeding values from their own completely separate analysis, as well as the maternal analysis. Going forward, Corriedale breeders will only receive breeding values from the maternal analysis, which includes new traits that previously weren't in the Corriedale analysis, such as eating quality traits and the new reproduction traits. So Corriedales will still be able to access a subset of reports and percentiles just for their breed, as is the case currently for the first cross sire breeds. The other enhancement that we won't actually spend a detailed time talking about in this series of webinars is the impact that the database redevelopment will have on the Dooney agreement and the way Dooney breeders submit data. We've been working closely with the Australian Dooney Breeders Association to navigate this, and there'll be more information coming directly for those Dooney breeders that are impacted by the changes. To begin, the first enhancements that we'll touch on is the implementation of TBLUP and the new accuracy algorithm. So who is impacted by these changes? TBLUP will only be implemented for the Merino evaluation, whereas the updated accuracy algorithm will be impacting all our evaluations that use genomic information, so maternals, terminals, and merinos. What changes can breeders expect to see as a result of these enhancements? Firstly, TBLUP, there's actually no changes at all to the breeding values or the accuracy reported alongside them, and we'll look into that enhancement in a little bit more detail shortly. And for the accuracy changes, we can expect to see some changes in the accuracy that is reported alongside the breeding value. Firstly, so what is TBLUP and why we actually need it? So as I mentioned before, this change doesn't contribute at all to any breeding value movement. So breeders actually won't notice any impact from this change. But what it essentially allows us to do is continuing to run our evaluations with growing amounts of genomic information. So you can see there from the graphs, and in particular the purple line on both graphs. The purple line on the graph on the left represents the growth in the number of genotypes for the maternal, merino, and terminal evaluation. And what you can see there is that for the merino evaluation, as of April 2022, we have more than 200,000 genotypes that get included in every fortnightly analysis. And as a proportion of animals that are coming into the merino evaluation, about 30% now of animals from the 2021 drop actually have a genotype. So that has been growing exponentially over the last 5 years. And so to ensure that we're actually able to continue to create breeding values, we needed a new way or new algebra behind the evaluation system to create breeding values. And so that is why we're implementing the TBLUP enhancement this year. The accuracy algorithm improvement, it does change the way that we are calculating the accuracies that we report alongside breeding values. And the reason we're making this improvement is to, as we have with TBLUP, where we've got a growing number of genotypes being included in our evaluations, we have to improve the efficiency and logic used to create or calculate those ASBV accuracies. So the accuracy algorithm calculation actually improves not only the speed, but also the memory and computer power required to calculate ASBV accuracy. This change will cause some movement in ASBV accuracy only, won't actually result in any breeding value movement itself. And the animals that are most impacted by this change are those animals that are from non-genotyped relatives of genotyped animals, or animals with genomic information but very little phenotypic information on themselves. So in summary of the TBLUP and accuracy algorithm enhancements, TBLUP is only being implemented for merinos at this stage because they are the analysis that has the largest number of genotypes and need this change implemented as soon as possible. And as I mentioned, with that change, there are no changes to breeding values or accuracy. The implementation of the new genomic accuracy algorithm will impact all our main analyses that use genomic information, so merino, maternal and terminal. And as a result, there will be some small downward shifts in the accuracy of the ASBVs, particularly again for those genotyped relatives or non-genotyped relatives of genomic tested animals. The next enhancement that we wanted to talk about and provide an update on is where we're up to with our index review. And this is important as this does impact our other enhancements that we are implementing this year regarding the inclusion of weaning rate in maternal and merino indexes, and the inclusion of lambing ease in the terminal indexes. As an update of our index review, all analyses have been impacted or looked at as part of this, and we'll hear more about the plan going forward. This year, we will see updates to the merino, maternal and terminal indexes, with brand new merino indexes set to be released for 2023. As a recap, this is a slide from our regional forums in 21 about what index changes we could expect of the future. This year, we will be making updates to the merino indexes to include our new component traits of reproduction, and we'll hear more about that later in the webinar, or you can watch a separate video explaining these changes. We have updated the Dooney reporting so that only the Dooney Plus index will be reported, and we are also including those new reproduction traits in maternal indexes. This year, we'll also see the introduction of lambing ease as a proxy for birth weight and lambing difficulties at birth into the terminal indexes. One change that we won't be implementing this year that was on this slide is around including new traits such as wrinkle, dag and resilience traits like body condition score into our indexes. And I'll talk a little bit more about our plan for this going forward. So to actually include the new individual components of reproduction, as well as other traits like body condition score, we actually need to update the bioeconomic models behind our software that we use to create indexes. That software is called Sheep Object. So there's actually some research and development work required to create a new version of Sheep Object where we can weight these traits accordingly in indexes and use the best possible information to provide an economic index. So that development is currently underway as part of phase 1, that research component of our index review. So that has been going for a couple of months now and is expected to be complete in July 2022. So that's updating those bioeconomic models and creating a new version of the Sheep Object index development software. Once we have the new software up to date, we can apply our new index assumptions, so new prices, and update those from our sources at both MLA and AWI, and we can begin to test those new indexes with our sheep genetics clients and advisory committee. So just ground truthing really the assumptions that we are using behind those indexes. That base testing period is expected to be conducted between July and September, and from that we anticipate there will be feedback that we want to include and refine on. So between September and December, we'll be refining those indexes based on the feedback received, continue testing that with our users, ready for the new indexes to be released in 2023. And this is merino indexes have been given the priority here over the maternal and terminal indexes, as they are the most outdated or oldest indexes that we have available to our clients. But in good news for maternals and terminals, the updates to the Sheep Object software that's happening as part of phase 1 will actually be a key enabler to having better software, so it'll be easier for us to update maternal and then terminal indexes into the future. So as mentioned previously, this year we will be improving our merino indexes, and we'll hear more in future webinars and also in this series about how we're including weaning rate in indexes. We'll also be updating terminal indexes, and there's another video on that coming that you can access. And another note is that this year we'll also be removing the maternal dollar index. And that was a key finding from that index review. We will have new merino indexes available in 2023, and we're looking at how we implement an ongoing rolling review of indexes to ensure that we're using the best assumptions that we can to drive genetic progress through these selection indexes.
So as part of our analysis enhancements this year, we will be introducing an improved reproduction trait and including this trait in indexes. So this enhancement is going to impact our merino select and maternal breeders who have access to the component reproduction evaluation. And what they will see is they will see this new reproduction trait called weaning rate, and they will see changes and improvements to their indexes. So I'm just going to start by doing a quick recap of our previous reproduction trait, which was number of lambs weaned, or NLW. So NLW was a single trait that was capturing reproductive performance across the entire reproduction cycle. So if we put that into perspective, here we've got 2 ewes, and they both wean 2 lambs each. So if we're using the NLW model, they actually have the same phenotype for number of lambs weaned. However, when we actually have a look at the pathway that those ewes took to get there, we can see that the first ewe actually gave birth to triplets and lost a lamb, whereas the second ewe gave birth to twins and reared her entire litter. So if we're looking at this from the perspective of lamb loss, that second ewe is actually the more desirable or more efficient ewe reproductively. So number of lambs weaned wasn't doing a good job of capturing these areas of lamb loss. So what we've done is we've developed a new reproduction evaluation. We call it our component evaluation. And what this has done is split that single trait up into its the different components of the reproduction cycle. So we have a conception trait, which is did the ewe conceive? We have our litter size trait, which is how many lambs were born. And then we have our ewe rearing ability trait, which is how successfully did the ewe rear her litter. And these traits have been available for maternal breeders since 2019 and for merino breeders since 2020. We really love this new component evaluation. What it means for breeders is that we can make more targeted genetic gain. You know, if you've identified that you've got good litter size, however, you do want to improve the number of lambs that actually turn up at weaning, you could look at maintaining the litter size trait, however, improving your ewe rearing ability trait. So it allows us to sort of target those specific areas of improvement. From a technical perspective, we're doing a better job of validating your reproduction data. So number of lambs weaned used to look at a joining cohort level. So it was nearly like a tick box. So if you had dry ewes in that joining cohort, it was a tick, you got number of lambs born. If you then had ewes that lambed and lost, it was a tick, you got a number of lambs weaned. In this new evaluation, we're actually validating every individual joining group for variation in the traits, and the same for our lambing groups. So we're actually checking, say, every joining group has variation in conception, so that, so making sure that we have dry ewes in that group, so we can actually evaluate those ewes' performance for conception. What this allows us to do is actually use more data. So if we have a scenario where we have a joining group where we don't have any dry ewes for some reason, however, we have single bearing, twin bearing and triplet bearing ewes in that group, what will happen for those ewes is they won't have a conception record contributing to the reproduction evaluation. However, they will have litter size because they have variation in their litter size. This new evaluation has also allowed us to incorporate genomic information into the trait. So previously, number of lambs weaned, if you were to genotype, it wouldn't contribute or improve the accuracy of that trait. However, now if you were to genotype, it will improve the it will contribute, to these component traits. So we went to the effort of splitting up what was a single trait into its components. However, we then had feedback from industry that, particularly from RAM buyers, that having a single combined trait is really useful to help simplify selection for reproduction. And this would also allow us to update our indexes to include these improved traits. So what we've done is we've developed a new combined trait called Weaning Rate, which is defined as the number of lambs weaned per ewe joined. And this trait is in the same unit as the component traits, so it's expressed as lambs rather than as a percentage as number of lambs weaned was expressed. And the way that this trait has been derived is that we take into account the economic value or the importance of the component traits at different litter sizes. So if you have a look at that figure on the right of the screen, what you can see is that at different flock litter sizes, so the horizontal axis, the value or the trends that we see in each of our component trait changes. So the economic value on the vertical. So what we can see is that as flock litter size increases, the actual value of increasing our litter size decreases. Our conception plateaus, but our rearing ability becomes increasingly important. So actually weaning those lambs at higher litters is increasingly important. One note is that for seed stock guys, you guys have access to the component traits. So although we've got this weaning rate trait that is helping to simplify selection for our RAM buyers, it'll still be important for you to look at those component traits in your selection decisions. So weaning rate is different to number of lambs weaned, although they do technically have the same trait definition of number of lambs weaned per ewe joined. However, weaning rate's been developed using that improved component trait evaluation. So we want to be able to use that improved trait in our selection decisions and in our indexes now. However, to move from weaning rate to NLW, we are going to see changes. So in the table on the screen, what we're looking at is the correlation between number of lambs weaned ASBVs and weaning rate ASBVs for our 2020 drop size in both the maternal and merino select evaluation. And that's indicating to us that we are going to see re-ranking of animals between their number of lambs weaned breeding value and their weaning rate breeding value. So there's a lot of reasons for why weaning rate is different to number of lambs weaned. In our weaning rate evaluation, we have more records than we did for our number of lambs weaned evaluation. And that's because we're using different sources of information for different traits. So as I was saying earlier, we can have ewes that have a litter size record even though they don't have a conception record. This means that we also get more animals with breeding values for weaning rate than we do for number of lambs weaned because there's more records in that evaluation. Therefore, we see more variation in weaning rate than we did in number of lambs weaned. The update of the model has also allowed us to review our correlations between reproduction traits and our other key production traits in our breeding objectives. And all of this is contributing to us getting more genetic trend in weaning rate than number of lambs weaned, which actually better reflects the phenotypic reproduction performance that we've seen from industry. So we want to move towards this improved reproduction trait and using it in our selection decisions, but an important part of that process is also including it in our selection indexes. So what we're looking at here is for our maternal indexes, we're able to swap out or sub in weaning rate for number of lambs weaned. In the table, we're looking at the correlation between the previous indexes, which included number of lambs weaned, and the new indexes, which include weaning rate, for different indexes and different cohorts of animals. And what we can see there is we have a very high correlation. So we're not expecting to see a lot of re-ranking in our maternals by including weaning rate in these indexes. What we do see, though, is that we actually see a change in the average index between the previous index and the new index with weaning rate. And one thing that will be important is, particularly for those where the average drops, is making sure that we re-benchmark ourselves. So that first line there, we're looking at the BLX index in our border breeders, and we actually see that the average of that cohort go from about 119 down to 112. So when we have new percentiles available for these new indexes, it'll be really important to adjust what we're used to looking at in terms of an average for the industry. We've then gone through the same process for our Merino Select indexes. So we're just looking at our plus indexes here because they are the ones that include NLW in them. For our Merino indexes, it wasn't as simple as doing a straight swap like it was for maternals. We actually had to adjust the emphasis we had on weaning rate when we included it in our indexes. And the reason for that is that we wanted to try and maintain our other trait responses within these indexes, particularly given we'll be looking at having a new set of indexes next year. So it was important to try and mitigate any other impacts on other traits by including this new reproduction trait. So we're looking at the same thing here as what we were looking at for maternals. We've got our correlation between the previous index, which included NLW, and the new one that includes weaning rate. You can see there that for the DP plus or the dual purpose plus index, the correlation is slightly lower. That is just because the DP plus index has the largest, reproduction has the largest contribution to that index of the three. So therefore, by changing the reproduction trait, we're most impacting that index. We then also have our averages for the index when it included NLW compared to when it includes weaning rate. We don't see the same magnitude of change in average as we did for maternals. However, it will still be important for our merino breeders to have a look at the new percentile bands when they're available. So in summary, we've got two changes coming in terms of reproduction that will impact our merino and maternal breeders. The first is that we will be replacing NLW with a weaning rate trait. This means that NLW will no longer be reported and that the reproduction trait that's available will be weaning rate. We will also be updating in any indexes that include reproduction in them from the trait being NLW to weaning rate. This will cause changes in indexes because we know that weaning rate is a different trait to NLW. So it will just be important for breeders to re-benchmark themselves when new percentiles are available.
The terminal indexes are also going to be updated within the 2022 analysis enhancements. And what that is going to look like is including lambing ease within the indexes, of course, only impacting the terminal analysis clients. So why have we been looking at including lambing ease in these indexes? There has been a rising rate of lambing difficulties occurring in the industry over the past few years. And this poses a significant welfare risk to the industry, which we need to be at the forefront of. Reducing this problem will also satisfy the welfare groups and the Australian consumer that ultimately are the people that drive the demand for our product. It was also indicated as a desire in the index review that was recently completed by Sheep Genetics. And of course, the producers themselves will also see significant benefit directly by including lambing in the indexes, as demonstrated by Andrew Swan in a cost analysis that he completed, which you can see in the table on the right of the screen there. So in this table, you can see in the far right 2 columns of moderate and hard, which represent a moderate lambing difficulty and a hard difficulty, which translate to a score of 2 or of an easy pull for a moderate difficulty, and a score 3 or hard pull, which is a hard difficulty. So in this analysis, he took into consideration stockman time and the lamb mortalities, and also the cost of ewe mortalities. So when you take into consideration all of those different factors and the time that you put into it for a moderate difficulty, for each difficulty event, a moderate one would cost you $82 in comparison to a hard difficulty, which would cost $144.65. So this is a pretty big cost when it all adds up. And so reducing this problem is definitely something that we want to be able to address moving forward and keep that cost at a minimum. As far as the indexes go that we currently have, they have been built to include the traits post-weaning weight, carcass eye muscle depth, and carcass C-site fat depth, which have got strong correlations with ultrasound measurements taken on farm, which is your eye muscle depth and fat depth there. We've also got lean meat yield, dressing percentage, intramuscular fat, and shear force. The intramuscular fat is the measure of like marbling that can be seen visually, and shear force is the amount of tenderness. So those two are our eating quality traits, which are at varying levels throughout the indexes. And most importantly for today's discussion is lambing ease, which is the lambing ease direct trait, which we're going to be including in these indexes as well. So when considering how we have come about these indexes, we build them based on a selection criteria of traits that we can actually measure. So these would be, you know, your weights that you can take on farm and your scans that you can take on farm. And also the breeding objective that we have that includes the traits of the economic value. So these are the carcass traits, and they're like the end goal, what we're actually going to be paid on having that economic value. And the relationship between the measured traits and the economic traits is what determines the index accuracy. And because we've got high correlations between our carcass traits and our scanned eye muscle depth and fat, for example, these high correlations relate to strong index accuracies there. And of course, for the other traits that might be more difficult for people to measure on farm, they can be done by progeny tests, getting meat science done, submitting sires, to the resource flock, and also nominating yourself to be involved in satellite flocks and things like that. And of course, there is genomic testing available for these traits within the terminal indexes, terminal analysis as well. So how did we come about getting lambing ease to fix these lambing difficulty problems? So we had a look, just for example here, I've got the terminal carcass production index. We had a look at including at first birth weight, and then as well looking at lambing ease, which lambing ease is a more direct measure of the end goal being reducing lambing difficulties. So here in this table on the right, you can see the first column are the different traits that are of interest, where not all of them are in the index as nominated by a little cross there. And the TCP index as it was previously. Then the next column along is the TCP index plus a consideration of birth weight. And in this example, we've included birth weight at an emphasis of 2%, as denoted in the top right square on the left of the page. Then the fourth column along in that table is lambing ease included in the TCP index at a rate of 4%. And the final column is lambing ease included at a rate of 9%. That's emphasis. So at first, having having birth weight included in the index, you can see that the birth weights, were being reduced in comparison to terminal carcass production, where these individual cell values indicate the response of an animal over time. So what the actual ASBV has changed to. So we can see that including birth weight did reduce that birth weight, but because of the high correlations of birth weight with the other weight traits, there was also reductions in weaning weight and post-weaning weight, which is definitely not something that we want to see, and ultimately it is definitely against the overall economic breeding objective of this index. So to combat this, we had a look at including lambing ease, and while there was still reductions in birth weight, the reduction in weaning weight and post-weaning weight were not nearly as much. So there wasn't as much of an impact on those growth traits and growth measures. And having it at that level of 4% in comparison to 9%, we decided the 4% was the more optimum level, where we were able to reduce that impact on post-weaning weight, maintain our eating quality measures, maintain yield, and ultimately improve lambing ease, which is what we wanted to do here. So what does this actually mean? What will the changes be having this come into effect? So here we've got an array of different tables that indicate the correlation between TCP as it was previously without lambing ease and TCP with lambing ease at 4% highlighted by the blue squares. So on the top right, where I've highlighted, you can see that we've got a correlation between the previous index and the index as it is now with lambing ease of 0.974 or 97%, which means it's a really strong correlation. And there's not much re-ranking within animals, which you can see visually in the scatter on the bottom left there in the blue square, where all of the animals are pretty well along the same diagonal line. And the top animals there are still the top and the bottom ones are still the bottom, with some re-ranking in the middle, mainly with those dots that are falling out the bottom, which denote to the animals that actually have a pretty poor lambing ease score as it is. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. We don't want to be rewarding those animals with poor lambing ease scores, because even though they might be really high on growth and have really good carcass production, if their lambing ease score is poor, they might be throwing lambs that aren't even going to survive. And what's the good of growing a lamb if it's, not going to make it past birth anyway? So how do we actually score lambing ease? This is the lemming score guide. I pulled out the actual scores themselves from the guide, which is available on our website on the brochures and fact sheets tab under resources. So briefly, what the scores are is a score of 1 would be unassisted, where you were present at the lambing site, but you didn't have to intervene at all. A score 2 is an easy pull, where a slight intervention might be required. A score 3 is a hard pull, so you really had to get in there and significant intervention was required. Then a score 4 is malpresentation, so this could be, your breech, or if the lamb's all tangled up and it just wasn't coming out correctly. And then a score 5 is veterinary assistance, where it was really problematic and you had to get a vet in. Note that if you are not present at the lambing site for that lambing event and it was unobserved, then you should leave that score as blank or put in a number 0. And we get asked as well, what happens if you don't record lambing ease? Well, lambing ease will still be informed through its correlated traits that include birth weight and gestation length. So if you were able to get out there and collect that birth weight within the 24-hour period for birth weight, then that will still have information flow through, as well as if you've got the birth date and things to come through for that gestation length. Of course, this is just correlated information, which, while it is strong and it will provide that information through the index, the best practice is now to get that lambing ease score so that you can have it directly contributing through to the ASBV and the index itself. So in summary, which of the analyses will be impacted? Just the terminals, because it's only the terminal indexes that are going to be having this change of including lambing ease, where breeders might see small changes in their current index, where sires that have got poor lambing ease scores will be the ones that are most impacted.
A really exciting key enhancement this year is our database redevelopment. This project has been in the pipeline for a number of years now for sheep genetics, and it's will be launched as part of our enhancements for 2022. So who is impacted by this change? All our evaluations, maternal, terminal, merino, kid plan, Dooney and SAM will all be impacted by this change. What does this change actually mean? We will see changes in ASBVs as a result, and breeders will now be able to access results following an analysis via the website rather than via an email and PDFs. So firstly, why undertake a database redevelopment? We know that there's been significant improvements in technology since the inception of sheep genetics back in 2005, and prior to that when we had LambPlan. So if we think about even in our own businesses, our computers, our mobile phones, our internet connectivity, all of those things have changed dramatically since 2005. So the database redevelopment was commissioned to bring sheep genetics along and update our systems so that we are using the best available technology and database infrastructure for our growing genetic evaluations. We also need to make sure our systems are more serviceable, so the language support and code behind our databases is currently serviceable by most graduates and most people working in IT. So we needed to make sure that we were able to take our evaluation forward and we make it more serviceable so we can make frequent, easy updates ongoing rather than having to wait another 15 years before another big database redevelopment occurs. The database redevelopment offers an opportunity to integrate our database with other industry databases like the NLIS system. And we're starting to see more individual carcass feedback being provided, as well as new data sources that weren't possible 15, 20 years ago coming online. So our database redevelopment has put our sheep genetics databases alongside other industry databases. So in the future we're able to find new sources of information to drive and underpin our genetic evaluation. We also need to make sure our evaluations are able to cope with the growing amounts of data being submitted, not only from these new data sources and on-farm data submitted by breeders, but also genomic information. The graph on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide indicates the current size of our genomic database in the blue bar, and the red line indicates how that's expected to grow exponentially over the next 10 years, just because of the sheer scale and size of genomic information. So we need to make sure that we've got systems that are scalable with that, with those increasing data demands for genomic testing, and as breeders continue to adopt this technology. The database redevelopment also provides an opportunity for on-the-fly feedback of data submission. So as breeders, when you submit data, you often get limited feedback about the type of information that was included in the file that you sent across until the evaluations run. So you could have a lag time of up to 2 weeks before you actually find out what data was included in the databases. The new database redevelopment with the improved import logic will actually be able to provide breeders and service providers that are submitting data to sheep genetics with feedback on the information that's contained in that file. So if there are any issues, you can fix it on the day of submission and make sure that the right data is sent off to evaluation to create breeding values. The redevelopment also allows us to update the logic that we use behind what data gets included. So it provided an opportunity for us to sit back, review that logic and make sure that we update that so that the best possible data again is being sent to evaluation. So to recap the actual redevelopment process, and this is important to understand when it comes to why we might see some changes in the way things are done and the way we report breeding values. So we started off with our different Merino Select, Lamb Plant and research databases, which had all been developed by different people and existed in different systems. And we consolidated all of those different databases into a single data warehouse where Merino Select data alongside Lamb Plan data is now all housed together. Once we had the data warehouse established, we had to develop a way of getting data into that data warehouse from your on-farm software. So a new way of submitting data into the data warehouse, and that's where that feedback mechanism I spoke of earlier occurs. Finally, once we had the data warehouse established, we actually had to get the data submitted from breeders and researchers out of the data warehouse and sent off to analysis, where we turn the cogs to create the breeding values that you report back. So that was the main step, and we'll talk a little bit more later about this step of getting data out of the warehouse and to evaluation, and that's generally why we see changes in breeding values, because of the improvement of the logic in this step. And finally, I spoke about improved reporting. Going forward from our enhancements this year, breeders will be able to access reports that are customizable and printable via the Sheep Genetics search site. So you'll receive an email when the analysis is complete, directing you to log in and access your new set of reports. So this includes genetic trends on the traits that you want to see that are important to your business, as well as part of that, going into the website through a single login to access the download for you to import into your software, so you can have breeding values in your software when you're in the yards, etc. I'll hand over to Emma now to talk through reasons that we might see breeding values change.
Thanks, Peter. The database redevelopment has given us the opportunity to review the way we handle the data you're collecting. So this has allowed us to ensure we're doing the best job of describing the genetic merit of your animals with the data provided. So this does mean that we're going to see breeding value movement when we move to this new database. And there are several key reasons for these changes, most of which are coming into play when we package up your data and send it to Ovis for evaluation. So we're just going to spend some time now going through each of these reasons. So the first is that we've reviewed the business rules around which animals we include in each run and whether their breed and performance data is also included. So every run has a specific breed list that tells us what to include in each or what's relevant to each analysis. We then include all the back pedigree on these animals, and we also include all progeny from relevant ewes, just as pedigree, so that we can calculate reproduction traits on these ewes. An example of this would be if you had a terminal ewe you were using, say, in a maternal flock, we're still getting reproduction information on that ewe. The second reason for change is that we've reviewed our data filtering procedures. So previously the Lamb Plan and Merino Select evaluations were quite independent, and there were differences in the way that the data was validated for those evaluations. The redevelopment has given us the opportunity to review these exclusion rules. So the first thing that's allowed us to do is make sure that the exclusions that we have in place are relevant to current and future industry. And secondly, it's allowed us to provide more consistency between our different evaluations. We've also updated the way that we handle age stages. So currently, breeders supply a measurement with an age stage, so let's say a yearling weight. In the new database, we take that measurement and we will be storing it based on the age of measurement. So we'll use the date of birth of the animal and the measurement date. What this allows us to do is that we can have harder limits around the age of animals within a stage. So what you can see in the graphs at the bottom of the screen, in the graph to the left, there's a fair bit of overlap in the colours between which are representing different age stages. In the graph to the right, however, though, is the new database, and what we see is there is a lot less overlap in the number of records being overlapped between age stages. So ultimately what this means is that we'll be doing a better job of applying genetic parameters to your records. So things like better application of heritabilities and correlations, making sure we're using the most relevant parameters based on when this animal was recorded. So we've shared these age stages, these revised age stage ranges with softwares, and we'll be sharing them with breeders too. For breeders, the key thing to remember is just to make sure that you're recording the traits you're interested in when the average of the group fits within the age range you're trying to target in your breeding objective. So the fourth reason we'll see changes in breeding values is that we have improved the way we build carcass files. Previously, kill traits like meat science and eating quality were treated in a management group that reflected their kill group. And this worked really well historically, where most of our kill data was coming from research flocks, where often ewes were AI'd, lambed down together, and those lambs were run together through to the abattoir. However, we've had an increase in the amount of breeder data being collected through projects like satellite flocks, and that meant we needed to update the way we handled this kill data to account for their on-farm management and management grouping of animals prior to being killed. So the new database is going to do a better job of bringing this on-farm information and kill information together, so that we're using the lifetime contemporary grouping of these animals and better accounting for on-farm and environmental differences on carcass traits. Finally, we'll also see a change in the number of contemporary groups used in the analysis, with a general increase across the board. And that increase is driven by all those changes I've already discussed, particularly with the age stage updates and our carcass grouping changes. But also we're doing a better job or a more consistent job of using dates of measurement when we're splitting up your management groups into different contemporary groups. So just for everyone's information, if you have a single management group but you record them over 2 days, we actually split those animals based on their date of measurement. And the reason that we do that is for traits like weight traits, where you know, we want to make sure that those that were recorded on the second day, they could have been in the yards overnight. So we want to make sure that we're not directly comparing them to the first day of weighing. That split in date of measurement is less applicable for traits like your fleece traits, or say your visual traits like, you know, you're getting a marking breach score. So for breeders, it's just really important to take into account or keep in mind the date of measurement you're submitting to us, as we do split your management groups up based on that date of measurement. So all of these improvements impact the way we handle your data, and they will impact your breeding values. So in terms of what this breeding value movement actually looks like, what we're looking at here is we've got the industry trends for indexes across the top of the screen. What we actually see is that the trends stay relatively similar at an industry level. Sort of at the second level there, we've got scatter plots. And what this is showing is that if we compare the old and the new database, generally speaking, the top animals stay the top, the bottom animals stay the bottom, and we just see re-ranking through those middle animals. On those graphs too, we've also got a correlation there, so we can see that, you know, it's quite a higher correlation on the index between the old and the new. So we're not expecting a huge amount of re-ranking in terms of indexes with our new database. So across the board, we see our carcass and eating quality traits like IMF and shear force impacted or change most in our new database, and that's because we've changed the way that we're dealing with the lifetime grouping for those traits. We will also see changes in fat, muscle, and fibre diameter in merinos. So in summary, our database redevelopment is going to impact all evaluations. And this is going to include a change in breeding values. So it'll be really important once these breeding values are available to make sure you go check them out, but also check them out and check out the new percentile tables so that you understand what the changes in breeding values actually mean. And it will also change the way that we access results.
As part of the analysis enhancements, we're also going to be doing some updates to the website. The Sheep Genetics website updates will impact all analyses and those who have an account with Sheep Genetics. Some of the impacts and changes that you can see coming will be the changes to how results are reported, as well as improvements to the search site functionality. A new way to access results will be available. So data will be submitted as normal through exporting from the software through to the email addresses. Once the analysis results are ready, an email notification will be sent, and on this email will be a link to the search site. Once a breeder or a service provider has logged into the search site, they'll be able to access their results through a new search result portal. It is important to note that for you to be able to access these new results, it is required that you have your search site account linked to your flock, as well as any service providers that you're using that you would like them to be able to access results are also linked to your flock. Here we just have a quick screenshot of what the new results access portal will look like. It contains all the information that you currently receive on the PDF reports. However, this new way of reporting the results is customizable and printable. So you'll be able to look at the genetic trends for traits that you're interested in for your enterprise, as well as some exclusion linkage and other information that will be customizable to what you're interested in. Some other really exciting search site enhancements will also be released at the same time. These updates to the search site will be launched and they've been selected to optimize the user experience within the database. Some of the changes that you'll be able to see are the same animal can appear in more than one catalogue. Pen card creation has been optimized to improve the speed of creation for some of our larger files, as well as a non-blurry display. Breeders and users will be able to give access to a service provider that they nominate for data importation, catalogue creation and results, and they'll be able to pick and choose those. As well, there will be a tool for admin users to look at all the data that's been submitted for an animal, allowing us to assist you with these breeder queries a lot faster. Breeders will also be able to request that their details are changed via the search site web rather than the form that's currently in place. Additionally, the trait recorder tick box and progeny counts will be back and visible on the search site. We've also removed the user login lockout after a set time. This has now been extended to 24 hours for a session. Admin will also be able to impersonate users to create catalogues on their behalf. And additionally, 20 traits will now be able to be displayed on the website at once. All breeders and service providers with a sheep genetics search site login will be able to see these changes. Just a summary of the changes is the results will now be accessed via the search site. Additionally, any improvements to the search site that we make will be based on industry feedback, such as the ones we discussed earlier. And it is really important that you make sure that you firstly have a search site login, that yourself and any service providers you'd like to nominate are linked to your flock to be able to see these redevelopments. Another exciting aspect of the analysis enhancements coming out is the data quality score refinement and rollout. This will impact all analyses as they'll now be able to access these data quality score reports at any time via the search site. Data quality has been looked into as a score because of its importance in gaining genetic gains. At the moment, we've got genetic evaluation coming in, as well as selection decisions made, and this makes up how genetic gains are achieved. If you put terrible data in, or it's not very good data, you will not be able to get the genetic gains that you're desiring. So we've created this data quality score as a way to be able to measure the quality of data that's been put in. The data quality score is made up of different components and able to assess this. So one such component is the amount of data we have available. This includes the number of animals and traits recorded. Additionally, we've got completeness and accuracy of records for aspects such as pedigree, so the depth of pedigree, whether we've got full sire dam pedigree for the animal, individual birth dates, the amount of performance traits that are being recorded, as well as the fixed effects that we can take account into the analysis. Data structure is also another important aspect of the data quality score, and this includes the amount of effective progeny we have, as well as linkage for the flock. Timeliness makes up a small portion of the data quality score, but is still an important aspect, and this relates to the amount of time it takes for pedigree and performance trait information to reach the analysis. One such example is if we're getting pedigree and performance traits on an animal at the yearling age, but none before, means we're not making selection decisions before this stage. All measures of the data quality score are roughly equal, with some adjustments for breed type, level of trait recording between the analyses, as well as variation and relationships between the characteristics. This is a quick snapshot of what the data quality score will look like on the first page. So you can see here we've got a couple of different measures. Firstly is a number value. This describes the position that you are in relative to the industry. Secondly, we've got a star rating. The star rating determines where they sit in terms of the percentiles that we've got, with each star equating about 20 points. So you can see on the scatter plot bar graph that we've got where they sit in terms of industry, and the different colours represent the number of stars. So if you have a star of 4, it means that you sit between 60 and 80. Another aspect of the data quality score that will be released is these data quality score strengths and room for improvement, which are automatically generated from the report. All Merino Select maternal, terminal and Dooney breeders with more than 3 years of data will be able to access these data quality score reports once the new analysis come out. The data quality score will be reported privately to breeders via the search site. In the future, we will look to display the star rating publicly on the search site. And additionally, we're going to be putting some more future work in how we can continue development for this data quality score to be available to some of the smaller analyses, as well as support we can provide for new members.
finally, I just wanted to recap the enhancement webinar, as well as note that this year is one of our biggest years for changes at Sheep Genetics, and we're really excited because we think all the enhancements that we're implementing this year really do have a big value in driving genetic progress forward and continuing to develop our genetic evaluations forward through the genomic era. So just wanted to recap with some quick take-homes on how best you can prepare yourself for these enhancements when they are implemented and we receive breeding values around mid to early May. So firstly, we have been working closely with your software providers. So they are making a series of updates to their softwares really to work in well with our new database redevelopment. So please keep an eye out from your software provider for any updates. And when those updates become available, please ensure that you download and install those updates so that you're having the best experience when not only submitting data to Sheep Genetics, but getting those breeding value results back and importing that into your software. Regarding the changes that we heard from around the introduction of weaning rate, it's really important for those maternal and merino breeders that currently already have the component traits of reproduction available to go on now and check your reproduction summaries to ensure that you are submitting all the data for conception, litter size, and new rearing ability if those traits are important to your business. We will be running a series of webinars post these enhancements. So once you've actually seen the results, see what these database redevelopments and weaning rate redevelopments and lambing ease developments look like for your flock, we will be running another series of webinars. So please keep an eye out for correspondence from Sheep Genetics when they become available. Likewise, we will be running regional forums this year across all our major states. So please, again, keep an eye out for these and register when those locations and dates become available. We also spoke about the importance of making sure that everyone that wants to view your results or have access to your data is linked via your Sheep Genetics website. If you can check this when you log into Sheep Genetics, there will be a box that'll have your flock code, or if you've got multiple flock codes associated with your login, they will appear there as well. And it will also provide a list of service providers that have access to those flocks. So if you would like a service provider to access your results or be able to submit on your behalf, please check to see if they're there. If they're not, when the website enhancements go live, you will be able to assign your own service provider through a new portal. But if you want to get prepared before the enhancements, you can get those added by contacting Sheep Genetics directly. A common theme in understanding these enhancements and understanding the new breeding values that come out is to ensure that you check the percentiles to get a good benchmark of what's the new average, what's the new top 20, top 10, top 5%. So please check out those new percentiles, and it's exciting that as part of the database redevelopment, we'll have a new way for you to access those percentile reports, generate PDFs for your sale catalogues, etc., with the traits that you want included on those percentiles. So make sure you check those out, and that will be really important in re-benchmarking yourselves and understanding the new average with all these changes implemented. And finally, when the new results section of the website becomes available, please take time to explore this and look at all the functionality that's available and customize it so that when you go in and receive an email that your results are ready to review, you can jump in and access them quickly, easily with the traits and information that you want displayed. So thank you everyone for listening in on our webinar series. If anyone has any questions, if you are a LambPlan client, please contact Gabby. If you are a Merino Select client, please contact Chloe. Likewise, Emma and myself are also available. If you're unsure who you need to be talking to, please call our Sheep Genetics, our main office phone, which is 02 8055 1818. And we look forward to working with you all as we implement these large but exciting changes.